Hello, my Juicy co-creators. Lilou here on the Juicy Living Tour. Today I'm in Santa Cruz, beautiful Santa Cruz in California, and I think we're going to very much enjoy this conversation. It's going to be very educational and an eye-opener because I'm sitting next to you, Foster. Thank you for accepting to do this interview in your own living room. Thank you.
A great pleasure to be with you again, Lilou, and in person this time.
Yes, not on Skype. Actually, it was a very successful video, and it went out. It's at over 100,000 video views, which is nice on the internet. And now I know that it's not so much about the quality of the image, but it's the content that is so important. And you bring a lot of important information out into the world. So I feel this is an essential conversation to have right now, and hopefully it will spread all around the world. And this is what you have done, through your movie Thrive, and we're going to discuss about the different components of that movies and what you wanted to really bring out into the world. Your last name is Gamble, so you're from the Procter and Gamble family, but you decided to take a different route and to bring out some information. You've been very curious, right? All your childhood growing up, and you went to Princeton University, and you're bringing some important information about economics, about the money, about the global agenda, domination agenda. So I'm thrilled to start with that part first, to kind of point out, before we go into the solution, before we go into those patterns and those codes and all those beautiful solutions that you're proposing, I would like to first talk about what have you found out. So there is a lot, but it's important to go back to those to those things. So first of all, what did you find out about how the a lot of people speak of the New World Order, but really, what do you have found out about how people or government or big corporation are controlling us?
Well, the title of our film was Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? Mm-hmm. And so Kimberly and I set out to see what was in the way of our thriving, because unless we know what's in the way, then we're not going to have... unless we know what's in the way, it's going to be very difficult to create effective solutions. So one of the things that we did was follow the money. And for those who've seen the film and have been watching what's going on in the news in the last year and a half, it's only been more validation that when you follow the money in any sector, whether it's media or education or science or banking or food, they all go up to the same sort of sources. They go up to a small group of banking families who are basically controlling the banking scam. This deal where they tell us that economics is so confusing we should just leave it to the experts. But those so-called experts have basically set up a situation where they get to make up money whenever they want, and you and I don't. In fact, we have to pay them interest to use that money that they just made up. So, of course, that's like a monopoly game where they're controlling the bank. And through that kind of scheme, they can end up controlling every sector if we let them get away with it, and they're almost there. So if we look at what's happened, in the last year and a half with the Libor scandal and the MF Global scandal, and now what's coming out about the Federal Reserve was finally had a little bitty audit, and it turned out that they had sent $16 trillion to other central banks around the world, and that's just what they had to tell us. That's the lives of our children, grandchildren, their children paying back interest on that fake debt, and that's what they're using to try to take over control of really every sector.
And so through, but how does that impact us every day, not having this kind of information?
Well, it's basically a giant debt scam. All the money that people are fighting over is created out of debt rather than in acknowledgement of goods and services. So when you borrow money that they just make up, then they're getting your wealth. You're putting yourself in debt. You're working the rest of your life to try to pay them back. So the wealth and power is getting consolidated into the hands of the very few. And so that was the kind of follow the money section, the second chapter of our film. And what followed that was the global domination agenda. Because once you realize that there's actually a very few people who are controlling this so-called New World Order, then the important question is, well, what's their agenda? Are they doing this for our benefit? Mm-hmm. And that's a whole nother topic we can go into if you want.
Yes, please. Let's go right into it, because all of this is part of a big conversation anyway. So you've through your website and your work and on the movie, you have put it in different pieces, but it's definitely all of it is linked, huh? So from the money, so then now this new world, can we say new world order, or is it? This is not how you call it, really.
That's a term that they use themselves. George Bush has used it in our film. You see Henry Kissinger using it, and many of the world leaders now use this term. And what they mean, New World Order sounds good. We need a New World Order, but that's what we don't need is a centralized control where a few people tell everyone else what they have to do with their lives.
So it has nothing to do with a conspiracy theory.
Well, the whole notion of conspiracy theory was created by the CIA in 1967 to try to distract people who were questioning the Warren Commission about the real source of John F. Kennedy's death. So that was created to try to stop conversations where people would start discovering exactly these agendas. So Kimberly and I prefer to call ourselves conspiracy analysts. We like to find the facts and then analyze those facts and try to make sense out of them. And what happened with Thrive was we didn't hold back. We covered, 14 different very controversial topics, but they actually make more sense when you step back and see how they all fit in together. And people have responded all over the world to that coherence because it makes a lot more sense than what we're hearing from the corporate media.
But how do you find out the true information and the not so true information, or what even the CIA or other people put out there? Because it seems it's confusing. There's so much out.
Well, through the internet, you can get a lot of much more good information than you used to be able to get when you were only getting from the corporate media. But of course, you need to go and do your fact checking. So we hired 2 independent fact checkers to check all the facts in the Thrive movie and on the Thrive Movement website. So that's the beginning. Once you start finding out what's really going on, then you still usually have to speculate because these decisions are made behind closed doors at places like the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, and then secret societies that you probably most people have never even heard of. So really what we're trying to do is pull on these threads and find out what's really going on. And once we get that, then we can look and see, all right, it's a lot of bad news. However, once you get your feet on the ground with what's really going on, then you can go, okay, well, at least now I understand. So now we can start creating the antidote to those destructive agendas, the deceptive, non-transparent processes.
So is it true that some people would like that there's less people on this earth?
As far as I can tell, there's quite a bit of documentation, various quotes from high-level people, the Georgia Guidestones, if people want to look that up on the internet. And it makes sense. If you look from the point of view of someone who wants to control the entire world, most of us don't wake up in the morning with that thought. Unfortunately, there are some who do. And we need to wake up to that fact, because in a world where we now have corrupt political systems, corrupt banking systems, corrupt media systems, corrupt corporations, the people who are willing to go along with that corruption, actually create that corruption, are going to rise very rapidly. Really, sociopaths and psychopaths do well in those systems because they don't have the usual conscience going on about, we can't, kill 1 million innocent people in Iraq. That thought would stop most normal people. But for other people, it's like, no, wait a minute, we want that oil, or we want to control the Middle East, and let's go ahead. And so it's important for people to wake up and realize that most human beings are wonderful, caring, compassionate people who would literally, as we've seen many times, give you the shirt off their back in a storm. But those aren't the people who are running the New World Order. So we just need to wake up, realize they're unfortunately, sick, damaged people who need healing. They don't need to be, destroyed. They need to be healed, but they need to be taken out of positions of power over other people's lives.
How many people does that represent, those people that have that power?
Well, there's a famous book called The Committee of 300, where John Coleman spent decades researching who are these people who are actually heading it up. Another source says probably 5,000 people in the whole world are actually running the show. The key thing is that it's a very small number in relation to 7 billion people who are actually looking to share the resources of this planet and to actually thrive. So the biggest fear of the New World Order would-be controllers is that people are going to wake up and realize that they should actually be free human beings living in a prosperous society on a healthy planet. And that's what's happening, fortunately, through the internet and through the courage of people like Edward Snowden and Bradley Manning and Julian Assange and Thomas Drake and Kristen Megan and so many courageous whistleblowers who are now coming forward and saying, I know these things to be true. Here are the documents. And then, of course, the government, really both sides, Republicans and Democrats in this country at the top, rage against, these traitors. These are people who are simply revealing the truth, particularly about the Constitution and about the violations of it by our own government for their own good, not for ours.
So what are those groups? Because your family was a big corporation, huh? I mean, you were born in Procter & Gamble. So is that part of some of the companies that actually manage or how do you say, influence strongly the whole society?
Well, almost any of the Fortune 500 companies are going to be complicit to some degree in this. My great-great-grandfather got together with his best friend and started putting soap and candles together and created a successful company that was famous for its integrity. They were the first company to have employee stock options and that type of stuff. It was something I was proud of in the beginning. But as it grew, by the mid-'90s, Dick Cheney was on the board. So it's not something that I associate with proudly anymore. I don't use any of their products. But I'm grateful for the original ingenuity that ended up building some wealth that allowed me, as one of the many, many descendants, to turn around and use that money to actually expose what's really going on the planet. So we have a pyramid diagram in the film called the Follow the Money Pyramid that is really helpful because most people are brought up thinking, well, the President of the United States is head of the free world, most powerful person on earth. Once you study this a little bit, you realize there are actually at least 6 levels above him for which he's dancing on the puppet strings, because the government, it's becoming more and more obvious, is owned by the corporations, particularly after the Citizens United decision. Now they can just put as much money in as they want to bribe all these politicians. Nobody makes it to the top without accepting those bribes, and then they're basically doing the bidding of Wall Street and other corporations and the banks after that. But above them, above the corporations, like Procter & Gamble, they've got to get their capitalization at cheap prices, and they do it from the banks. So the banks are above the corporations. But then those banks need to get favors from the central banks, from the Federal Reserve in this country. And each major country has now its central bank. And then above that is the central banks of central banks. There's the IMF and the World Bank, which is over the umbrella over all of that. And finally at the top is the Bank of International Settlements, which most people have never even heard of. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers created that to basically create a one world banking system based on their fiat money, on their fractional reserve banking, where they get to be in control of the monopoly game. Fortunately, that is now all getting exposed, and the major banks, there's 5 major banks in the United States, they're all trillions, hundreds of trillions of dollars in debt with their derivatives and so forth. So they're actually broke. The U.S. government is the most broke entity in the history of planet Earth. So it's all a shell game right now. And it remains to be seen now what are the solutions that can actually turn that around, because their deception has undercut their own authority.
So what happened in 2008 when there was this huge crash? Did some information leaked actually to provoke that?
Well, no, I think this was an intentional crash, as was the crash in 1929, which is now documented. The Federal Reserve has taken blame for that. They said they wouldn't do it again, but they turned around and, of course, did it again because, remember, the goal of the global domination agenda is not to restore well-being to the lives of American citizens. It's to create a one-world government with a one-world currency, one-world police force, and so forth, all under the control of the international bankers. All the taxation will go into the World Bank, and it'll be run by these shadow characters behind the scenes. So in 2008, when the American economy essentially collapsed, and it's not done yet, it's only smoke and mirrors and printing billions of dollars a month that is keeping any semblance of recovery going. Now, and my research revealed to me that the ultimate goal is to collapse the United States, because the 300 and some million people who have a history of free speech and gun ownership, independence, is the major hurdle to creating this one world government. So as we describe in the movie, I believe very clearly, and is only getting confirmed, that their goal is to collapse the dollar, take down the U.S., and then come in with this plan for, okay, now we're going to have a one world cashless society. And the UN is going to be in charge, which was created by the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And the World Bank is going to be the banker, and now you're all under our thumb. So they're not that far away, given the economic situation, given their control of the central banking system in almost every country in the world. But on the other hand, they didn't really plan on the internet. So, I mean, Thrive has been seen, documented by around 18 million people. But so many people see each DVD in public screenings and home screenings and so forth. It's probably like 30 to 50 million, more than a million a month are seeing it. And that's just one of many fantastic media resources like your own station, which is getting the word out about what's really going on. So their biggest fear, the Illuminati's biggest fear, is happening. People are waking up. They're finding out the emperor has no clothes, and they're saying, we don't want to look at that. We don't want to have you guys in charge anymore. So there is the largest spiritual movement in history worldwide, is people waking up from their spirit to their own sovereignty and linking up with other free beings around the world and saying, no, we're going to change this game from the ground up. We realize that we're never going to get that from the corporations, from the bankers, from the governments.
So we're going to speak later on what it will take to thrive, because this is definitely the exciting conversation. But it's important to get those facts, to realize what's going on, to wake up, because we definitely can get some strengths from that also. What are some of the different things, like in health, what's going on with the health system and the pharmaceutical, for example? Because they're making quite a lot of money. There's big margins there, aren't they? Through selling drugs.
We came to the sad realization in our research that Kimberly and I were doing, that we don't have a healthcare industry in the U.S. We have a sickness maintenance profit-making machine. And that's really true for most of the world. And so Kimberly did a beautiful piece in the movie about her experience of discovering that cancer cures were being suppressed. If you picture just from a point of view of world domination, depopulation, and profit making, it's not profitable for them to cure cancer if what they can provide is chemo and radiation and that type of thing. So literally many real cures have been suppressed. I'm happy to say, just to give a little glimpse of the solution part, that we have been contacted by many inventors and healers from around the world who are looking for ways to bring their technologies and their healing processes safely out, because they recognize it's dangerous, but that it's also time.
We'll go more, and I'm interviewing, by the way, Kimberly Gamble after this interview, so this is definitely going to be a complementary and something to look at after and or during. That would be quite hard, one from each year. No, we have to really take the time to listen to this information. How about the, where is the money for taxpayers going to? From the taxpayers, where is that money really? What is your research found? Well,
most of it goes, about 60 to 70% of it goes to the military and paying this fake interest on these loans from the Federal Reserve. So, and then the rest of it goes to various entitlement programs and so forth, and does some good. But what people are beginning to discover is that most of that money actually goes into the politicians' pocket. It goes mostly into the corporations' pocket, and people who really need the health care, need good education and so forth, are seldom getting either. So ultimately, we're going to need to actually question the notion of whether or not the government taking our money whether we like it or not, and then going and spending it basically how they want, on Federal Reserve, on wars, on subsidizing GMOs and vaccines and all that type of stuff, is in fact going to create a sustainable society, whether or not it's just in the first place, and then whether or not it's actually going to create a sustainable society. And I would say unequivocally no.
Education, same thing. Corporations are actually influencing the education and putting some things in place there, or have been putting for a long time. Some things.
We got to interview John Gatto, who was one of my heroes in the education field for the film. And the first question I asked him was, well, John, you wake up tomorrow morning, now you're Secretary of Education. You get to do whatever you want. What kind of system of education would you put in? And he said, Foster, that's the wrong question. I said, really? What do you mean? He said, as soon as you're trying to put in a system, it's no longer education, it's schooling. It's mandatory indoctrination, serving the corporate agenda. And that's exactly what we've got, unfortunately. And so you see all the high school dropouts and the depression amongst students and the frustration and the hyperactivity and so forth. Young people do not want to get up at 6 a.m. and go and sit in a desk and be told information that's not either exciting to them or in many cases not even true about history, economics, liberty, that type of thing.
Food is a big chapter, of course, because every day we eat food, but we're not really conscious of what we put in our mouth. We talk more and more about those GMOs.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine the gauntlet that a typical person goes through in their day of just eating breakfast or going to the food store, going to a restaurant, whatever, and trying to get some natural, whole, organic food that nature meant for us to eat for healthy nutrition. Because if you look at the bovine growth hormone, you look at the antibiotics that are in the food, you look at the fluoride in the water, you look at the GMO foods and the aspartame and the MSG and on down the line. Why in the world is our food so full of toxins? Not even to mention the pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers that are there before it even gets harvested.
Profit?
Well, profit is what keeps most people involved in doing that. But remember, the people at the top have all the money they could ever want, and they can print it when they need it. So their motive is not profit. Their motive is control and depopulation, as far as I can tell. And that is very, very dangerous. So it's no accident that people are obese, that they're sick, dying early, hyperactive, all this type of thing. When you read people like Russell Blaylock has done a lot of research. Mike Adams is doing fantastic research on this. Joseph Mercola. You read or listen to what they're describing in this, and it's purely intentional that those things are ending up in our food to keep us sick, to keep us in debt, to keep us dumbed down so that we don't question this authoritarian system.
Because when we don't eat well, we feel really down, and we feel like not moving out of and not going out of our couch.
Yeah, and if the food additives don't get you, then the chemtrails will, and the pesticides, and just the electronic pollution and the radiation that's in the air and so forth. This is not accidental. The good news is it was basically put in place by a very few people with a destructive agenda. So when we wake up to that fact, then we can actually get rid of that agenda and restore each system to its wholeness.
What is the role of HAARP in all this? We hear a lot this HAARP. What does that stand for, and how bad is it?
It's the high altitude active. I can't remember the last two initials, but what really matters is that it's the largest antenna array on the planet. It's up in Alaska. It's kind of co-owned by the government and the oil companies. And they acknowledged early on, now they've tried to hide this information, but they acknowledged it was for weather control. They actually bragged that they could bend the jet stream all the way down to Los Angeles and so forth. But with that equipment, it's been proven, and they have the patents, you can read them, that they can not only do oil and gas testing from the atmosphere, but they can amp up the voltage of electricity that they're putting in and take those same vibrations. What they do is they basically create a huge high pressure area that bends the bottom of the ionosphere up. And then when it snaps back down, it sends these electromagnetic pulses into the earth. And if they do it low-key, they can just tell where the oil and gas is. But if they really amp it up, they can create earthquakes at will. And there are certain signatures. First of all, sometimes you see certain lights in the atmosphere before one of those earthquakes. But also there are people who are measuring this in the Earth's atmosphere around the planet, so they can tell when HAARP is turned on and off. And before the big earthquake in China, and again in Chile, and again in Haiti, the HAARP was turned on to maximum amplitude for like 3 days, and then cut off the moment those earthquakes started. So these same unwise people, to give them the benefit of the doubt, who want to depopulate and control other people's lives for their own benefit, or at least to try to manage their own fear and hoard their own wealth, are using weather control. They're using earthquakes. They're using what's called geoengineering, same as the chemtrails. They're using all of this to try to gain control, sicken people, control their minds, and with the ultimate goal, I guess, is to end up with just enough people to serve them, but not so many that they can revolt, like a debt slavery revolt. And they end up then confident that their technology, their shadow government technology, is going to heal the planet. And then they're going to bring back out their organic seeds that they've been hoarding, that Bill Gates and Syngenta and Swedish government and others have built.
The region, is a big. What is your view on what's happening up there in Norway with that big seed bank? Because I went all the way up there and I spoke to their government, but I didn't get much information. Strangely enough,
I won't tell you that. No, it's if the same people who are hoarding organic seeds like no one has ever done in history are at the same time promoting GMOs and toxic vaccines in Africa, South America, Asia, U.S., and so forth, then that doesn't quite fit from a normal point of view. And this is just one of many cases where what I find the best thing to do is put on the lens of the global domination agenda, horrifying as it is to do, and say, oh, okay, if I wanted to rule the world, then would it be effective to get rid of most people by making them sick and dumbing them down and so forth, killing them in many cases with wars and so on. And then ultimately, when the world is the way I want it, then restoring the health of the planet, which I know should be there in the first place, and bringing out the organic seeds so I and my family and our ilk get to live on a healthy planet, rather than realizing that everybody can right now. There's enough water, clean air, there's enough food resources for everyone to be thriving on the planet right now. The main problem is fear and non-transparency and the ignorance and destructive worldview of the people who right now are controlling most of the power centers.
And feeling powerless.
Yeah, exactly. I have seen some testimonials, literally refugees from within the Illuminati, who describe when these secret meetings take place, and people talk literally about how can we control the whole world. And what they keep talking about is what they call the X factor. Because no matter how much money, no matter how much military force, no matter how much media they can control, this thing called the X factor keeps getting out of control. And really what it is, the rest of us would recognize it immediately. It's truth, it's love, it's compassion, it's the beauty of the human spirit and just of the life force itself. And obviously in the long run, no destructive human beings are going to take over control of that. But the quicker we wake up, the less damage is going to be done, and hopefully we can actually, thrive on a healthy planet now rather than getting into some giant war that's going to set it back millions of years.
Do you know how they decide and get together, and how often, and how does this work? This whole little thing of getting how many people even?
Well, I know only what I've heard from refugees, and from what I read from people like Jim Marrs and Alex Jones and David Icke and many others who have done copious research on this. And there are secret societies in every country, every major country, that usually involve a lot of the politicians, bankers, and corporate leaders. And unfortunately, it involves oftentimes not only banking scams and environmental destruction, but I ask myself, what's so secret that the leaders of the world can't bring the cameras into the Bilderberg meetings or the Trilateral Commission meetings? If they really have our best interest in mind, why don't they just broadcast it? In my experience, what needs to be kept behind closed doors is sex, money, and power. So it's all about hoarding the wealth. It's all about a lot of perverted sexuality and child abuse and that type of thing, and about how do we consolidate the power over other human beings.
Even sex, huh? You think they do speak about sex behind those doors, and they can influence that?
Well, they not only speak about it, but there are major rings worldwide of pedophilia and satanic ritual and so forth, in which a lot of these people are involved. It's unfortunately a global epidemic of child torture, and it's not a subject that we promote a lot because oftentimes it sounds so incredible that people don't want to go into it. But there are resources for those who feel ready to actually experience what is, for me, the bottom of the barrel. It's the lowest of the low of anything that I found in my research. There are plenty of, just look up on the internet, Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor. And people like this who were involved and who've gotten out, they escaped and were protected and have blown the whistle and written books and done videos and so forth. And the reason this is important is, number one, to protect these millions of children who are being abused in this way and disappearing and horrible things happening to them. But secondly, so that we understand just how dangerous these people are who are actually controlling the banks and the militaries and the nuclear weapons and so forth. Because once you cut off your own compassion to that extent, then pushing a nuclear button, especially if you're old and frustrated or whatever, doesn't seem like that big a deal to those kinds of people. So hopefully that'll help wake the rest of us up to that these people need help, but they need to be taken out of power, and we actually need to not have concentrations of power that allow for any human being to have that kind of power over other human beings. And that's a lot of what we're exploring in the whole liberty and solutions initiatives of Thrive.
So media are a lot into those big medias on TV actually inject this fear, inject those ideas into, that's how they communicate, right, to the population?
Well, sometime if you can put yourself through watching a mainstream media news show, just ask yourself at the end of it, how am I feeling? And probably very confused and very afraid. And that's a lot of the initiative of the mainstream media is, number one, to make money. So they're going to, if it bleeds, it leads, as they say. They'll put on the gory stuff because people get riveted to it. They have to satisfy their particular sponsors, who are usually the drug companies and the military-industrial complex and so forth. So they'll promote the upcoming wars and all that type of thing. But ultimately, they're working for the higher agenda of keeping people distracted by, Hollywood scandals or by a little incident here or there. And meanwhile, they're not realizing that billions of dollars a month are being stolen out of your pockets, out of your children's pockets by the central bankers. And more wars are being covertly initiated by, executive orders or intelligence agencies rather than having anything to do with the people or justice or compassion for other societies.
Does the president knows exactly what they're going into when they sign up for this, or can they be actually, once they're in position, be very surprised of finding out so many things? Is that something even maybe planned a long time in advance?
Well, I think these days, there hasn't been a president, secretary of defense, or secretary of the treasury who hasn't been a member of at least one of these secret societies for probably 40 to 50 years. So it's my belief now that no one gets up to be, like in this country, the presidential or vice presidential candidate for either Republican or Democrat Party without having not only signed up for that agenda, but proven themselves willing to enact that agenda all the way along. Because when the controllers are putting a puppet in place to run their agenda, they can't be they can't have any doubt as to whether or not he or she is going to go along with it. So
right, left, Democrat, Republican, all of that is about the same. Those are just labels.
Well,
without going into politics,
yeah.
but you know.
At the top, they're working for the same agenda, and you can see at the top, the Republicans and Democrats don't speak out against the wars. They don't speak out against the banks. In most cases, they don't speak out about the health issues and so forth. There are some politicians who I respect a lot for their honesty, their consistency. People like Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul, who they're working within a political system, but at least they're trying to do it honestly. And they're actually trying to have things work for people. But you can see the great extents that the media and the traditional parties go to marginalize them because they don't want them coming into a position of authority.
Is there some other things that we need to point out before we go into the whole Thrive, the amazing part 2 that I'm going to get so much juice out of, I feel?
Well, that's enough for me.
Yes, this is pretty...
for your listeners.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm excited to speak in this part 2 now about those solutions. Thank you so much, Foster. Stay with us.